So, Samuel, right, I'm actually really excited to be chatting with you because I met Chris Koelma some time ago. Well, actually, at first, I had just heard of music teachers in international schools, and I thought that
hmm
was such a cool thing. I wanted to chat with him about that on here. So, myself and a partner of mine who co-host these episodes, Leon, he and I chatted with Chris. Then I had the opportunity to go to one of the big gig PDs that they do with
Yeah.
Anna Gower and Musical Futures. So I interviewed him about that. By going to that, this was last year in Kobe in Japan.
hmm hmm
He did quite a lot about stuff that is credited to you, actually, the
It's
musical pathways for technology.
been really good to me. Yeah. It's
Well,
been about 2 years of just trialing, testing, implementing, questioning, and I do it in my classroom, but having spoken to Chris, he's now taking it on the road, quite literally, and working it out with schools, seeing the reaction, seeing what people do. It's been really good. Yeah.
it's fantastic. And I that was actually one of the reasons I signed up for that big gig was because I was curious. He and I ch had chatted about music technology pathways, here anyway. But then I was really curious about learning more about that. And so I went to the big gig and he explained the 10 pathways, which it's I
Yeah.
for me, like I'm sure for any music teacher who has tried to integrate technology into their classes,
hmm
knowing what we're talking about right now is super useful. But even beyond that, it seemed to me like so many people that I talk to who are hobby musicians or even professional musicians, and they're trying to learn all this new technology. Like someone my age, samplers and things like that were used by a very small select group of people. We didn't use that in the type of music that I played back back in the
Or
day.
the massive huge boxes that you had to literally lug in a van or something to then plug in and then floppy disk in. Yeah.
So maybe we should start there. Honestly, with
Oh,
speaking with you, it's a little difficult to figure out where do we start. I mean, you're a diploma program music coordinator.
yes, at the
Current.
International School of The Hague in the Netherlands, and I'm actually Australian. So I've worked in middle and high school in Australia, and they run their national curriculum, so I've taught that. But then some schools run the International Baccalaureate,
Mhm.
which is a global curriculum. And that's when I started looking at international schools. And having taught that for a few years, I then moved to South Korea and taught the International Baccalaureate there. And I had, my 7 a.m. string classes, 7 a.m. band classes, jazz band, we call it a zero block. And then I would teach the diploma and middle school and actually primary school. That was a gig. That was interesting. It was like Zumba class every single day. It was
Getting your
intense.
steps in.
Yeah, exactly. And then I moved with my family to Vienna. I went to international school there, and that was again another complete mind shift, world focus. I learned German, 20, no, did I say 30 years ago? And I'm walking through Vienna, and all my words are coming back, and I'm speaking in German. And my wife says, "How on earth are you able to do this?" And it was just the stuff you learn in school. You never know it. You get that opportunity to do it.
Yep.
And then moved from there to the Netherlands, and that's where I am now. And I've been here for about 6 years now. And both of my two boys are in high school. One is in the diploma program doing diploma music right now, which is really exciting. He plays piano, yes,
Yep.
and he's also doing visual art. So it's not like, the music teacher, dad says you have to do music. We give them their own choice and we let them choose what they want to do. But his focus is computer game design and computer game music, and that's what he wants to move into with his career. And the younger one plays viola, started with violin, and parents said, no, no violin. I've got sensitive hearing. No, no, no. And he went, Dad, I want to play violin. and eventually he picked it up and just played it.
Hmm.
So we kind of had to say as parents, okay, you can play the violin. And now he's switched to viola and he's loving that too. So that's kind of my really brief story. And through that time, I've been running a website, wrightstuffmusic.com, and it's been to just share things I make. I think as teachers, most of the time, we don't have time. So I
Yeah.
thought if I shared what I made, it would help people, it would reach people, it would connect with people. And that has kind of been my focus. But I think in the last few years, as my boys have gotten older, I've started looking, going, okay, I could squish this into a book. I could publish this. I could, put this in a different format. And that's kind of why the book behind you, the music concepts, it was about 20 years of lessons just squished into 12 chapters. A lot of artists and musicians were really kind, and they literally gave me sheet music, examples. Yeah.
I I mean, the for me the thing I got this last year actually.
Hmm.
Um, some of what I love about this book is that, like the stuff that you explained about the music technology pathways, it's done in a way that's very concise. I won't say simplified because conceptually it's not, but in terms of presentation, it's concise presentation. So the phenomena of rock and pop. So recently I used this section, what musical features define a style, which
Yeah.
is basically, it is the crux of our second unit for our MYP students, middle years program. And so I looked at that and I said, okay, so that's how I'll approach it. It was honestly inspired very much by that section of your book.
Hmm.
What I did with the unit was I took it and I said, okay, like usually I let the students pick the repertoire that they play, which I love doing. But this time I said, okay, I'm going to have to limit this a bit because what they're going to do, I picked classical, jazz, and rock. Those were the three genres that they could choose from. Then they were going to analyze what exactly that means. Because I ask kids, what's jazz? And they say, oh, my dad listens to jazz and it's really quiet. And it's like, it's what he listens to when he wants to like chill out with a glass of wine or something. And I said, okay,
Hmm.
what about Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie? Not exactly what I would call chill out music if you listen to Giant Steps.
Hmm.
So I looked through your book there and I found that question about the elements that make up different genres. And I thought, well, no, it's not just genres, it's also subgenres. Because you have
Yeah.
cool jazz, you have smooth jazz, you have bebop. So what the kids did was we wrote a very simple melody line. Just give me a letter from A to G. Okay, yeah, yeah. Now you. Okay, and we did, A, G, C, D, whatever. We chose if it would be quarter notes or half notes or whatever, and we had a melody line. And I said, okay, now in small groups, you're going to go based on the research you've done about the genres and subgenres. What are the elements that make that, let's say, for the example, they're doing smooth or cool jazz.
I like that.
Turn this melody into cool jazz.
Mm. Hmm. I love that. And instantly you have a collaborative, investigative exploration that the kids will literally have to dive into to answer that.
Yeah, and some of them, it was so amazing to me
Yeah, I
how
love.
much they understood that, okay, like jazz. When I say jazz to my kids, they go, "Oh, do that, do that, do that, do." That's jazz.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought that was cool because that's kind of what you talk about in here. Like, how does rhythm help to define a genre, you know? And I just thought, yeah, this stuff is very easy to apply to the real world, like to the actual classroom,
To
rather.
today's classroom.
Correct.
Because
Yeah,
we all know things have changed so much since COVID as well.
yeah.
Um, Not to mention, as you said, like genre and then subgenre and then whatever else is coming next. What I love what you did is it was never the intent for it to be a textbook where you literally go, okay, I've done chapter one, now I've done chapter two, three, four, five. It was like a cookbook. You flick through to find the recipe you're looking for that night. What are you feeling? I'm feeling like this. My kids need this. And then you literally take and modify it for your classroom. That was the overall intent of that because I hear how you organized your lesson and structured with the kids what they were to do. And that's how I approached writing it because I thought if I write a textbook, I used to teach math as well, middle
Mhm.
school math.
Me too.
If you write a textbook, oh, you as well?
Yep.
Oh, nice.
Grade
That's a
six and
good
grade
screen.
seven for algebra.
Nice. You know textbooks. Like, all right, kids, turn to this. We're going to do this activity, and you kind of sequentially go through. Um, if you put music into a book, it is really hard not to approach it that way because of how we approach textbooks. So by putting in like computer game music, or putting in, I think I've got like we have to question Stormzy, the artist, in there, or is rock plagiarized? Like, is all rock music forever actually just plagiarized from someone else?
Something else. Yep.
We're approaching it from a different perspective. And if you find that works for you, that's exactly my intent. So I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
You've made my
Well,
day.
that's awesome. Well, thank you because I mean I actually when I first saw this, I don't remember exactly where I saw it. It was probably when we were doing our international order at one point, and they said, "Okay, music, what do you need?" Oh, let me take a
There's a
look.
music book.
There's a book.
Yeah.
So when I first saw it, I thought, well, that's weird. I didn't think they did an MYP music textbook. So then I started to look through what it was, and I realized, oh, thankfully, it's not that.
Mm.
And I very often make the comparison between music and food. I do it a lot with my students, for example. So you said a recipe book, and
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
we're definitely talking singing from the same hymn book, you know?
This idea, I think, this idea of the cookbook, like a secretive little shout out here. I've got some other books on that are cooking. Haha. um, and that is, yeah, yeah, budumsh. I actually like this analogy. It's like a composition cookbook I'm working on with cultures from all around the world, or also technology, because the thing by traveling from Australia to South Korea to Vienna, like I've been to Cuba, China, Vietnam, I've this international teaching has taken me literally all the way around the world.
Right.
And what I found is, regardless of the curriculum, whether it's national or IB, music is so broad, so deep, it connects with people so personally that to walk into a classroom and think I'm going to teach every single kid the exact same thing, regardless of age, is not only daunting, but it's almost impossible in a way. So I really admire the Orff approach where they manage to get Orchidai, where every kid learns the melody, the bass line, the rhythm, and everyone's making music together. I
Mhm.
really like that approach because then you have something to build from. But as they get older and you introduce technology, the same thing happens again. Every year, every month, almost every week. And in fact, last week, Teenage Engineering just brought out a new device. Um, Tech is just exploding and it's happening all the time. How do you keep up? Let
Yes.
alone teach it to the kids. Um, so it's almost the same problem. If you've got multiple styles of music and you love some and your kids don't, but you're teaching music, and then tech comes along and there's so much that kids love and you love, but you have only how much time to teach in a lesson, you again it becomes so overwhelming that I actually empathize with people who say, I'm not going to do that. Or, you know what, it's too hard. I get it because I've seen it.
Too hard. I mean, I get what you're saying as well, but it's also, I mean, one of the things that I love about our music classes, we get to do a lot of interaction and collaboration, or the
Mhm.
assignment that I just explained to you. the kids were talking and they were searching for things online and they were listening to Charlie Parker, and for me, all of that interaction was so key to it. And so it's not just that it's hard to do the tech side, it's that also it's sometimes hard to, for me at least, to deal with the fact that the kids, if they're on GarageBand or Ableton, they're all by themselves,
To
you
let
know?
go.
Well, I just
Would you phrase it that way?
I think the fact that they sort of lock themselves into a screen again,
Mm,
like happens so often. And I did speak with Chris Koelma about this as well, and he said, sometimes that's what you need. You need that woodshedding moment where it's just you and your creation and your thoughts.
mm.
But there is some stuff that happened. So first of all, when Chris was showing us the Roland actual
Yeah, yeah.
like sampling boxes
Boxes.
and
The era boxes. So you've
error,
got a drum machine, like a mini Juno, a vocal sampler, and now an actual sampler. Yeah.
right? So that was one of the things that happened is at the big gig when one of the first things that they said was, okay, pick an instrument in the room to play, but as music teachers, you have to pick an instrument that you can't play. So I'm looking at the bass and the drums and the guitars and the pianos, and I'm thinking, I play all of these.
Mm.
But I looked at the sampler, and I said, I don't know how to play that. Can I use that? And
Mm-hmm.
Chris said, yeah. So it was part of our discussion about how the way you've done the pathways here, it's
Mm-hmm.
that each of those technologies is just another instrument in the room.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, like when I was,
Hearing that message come back from you that's literally traveled around the world, that is so cool.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
well done, because somehow you played that game where you whispered something in somebody's ear and the message came back the same.
Well, that was my point about the tech, and I love how it seems the way that you teach your students is that there is a freedom, there is a facilitation that you promote, allow, encourage that brings out that idea from the kids. Because we all know they can go home and they do this on their own. They watch YouTube or TikTok now and Instagram and they find artists, they connect and they do it.
Yeah,
It's very different within the classroom. And we have, if you teach the end of years like diploma, as you know, you have submissions you have to hand in and like grades and stuff like that. But the pathways was a, how would I put this? Without, I'm trying to think of walking down the garden path. That was the idea of the pathway. You open your back door, and there's 10 different pathways that you can choose to go on.
mhm,
It's not to panic you, it's not to intimidate you. They're all beautiful pathways. And you pick one and you take a stroll. You just go for a nice little walk. You pick up the device, you have a go, you test it, you document it. Because that's what's on TikTok and Instagram and online now. Everyone's videoing their process or writing about it.
right.
That helps our brains. And I'm still very analog.
Hmm.
I've got rows of notebooks behind me where, you know, yeah, the same thing. Exactly. Yeah. And it's amazing that taking that nice walkway, learning how to use a drum machine or learning how to, so that would be under the pathway called triggering. Or if I chose sampling, if I went down that lovely garden path, I learn everything I can in a short time. I document it, and all of a sudden, I come back home and I can sample.
Mhm.
There's no fear, there's no trepidation, there's, hang on, I can do this, just like the kids. And then if Chris or someone hands a device to you and it's a sampler, but you have to work it out, all of a sudden you have so much knowledge that you can apply. And it kind of created this, would you call it an aha moment?
Absolutely. Yes.
Like a light bulb moment. You go, hang on, does that mean no matter what tech comes out ever, I could use it?
That was exactly what I loved about that moment. You just used the term aha moment because I said to Chris, I've been teaching in international schools for 26-ish years.
Woohoo. Congratulations. Yes.
Yes, I'm that old.
I'm 20. I won't say how long. Yeah, yeah.
And I've
Just
done really
gray hair.
great, yeah, yeah. I've done some really great professional development for music and other things, but that was the big gig in Kobe was the first time in years and years that I had a moment where I felt like, wow, like I felt like the first time I picked up a guitar and tried to get a chord, and it was
Mm.
like, you've got a guitar behind you, so you know what I'm talking about,
Oh,
And that's you
I'm
try to
I'm a
hit that.
guitar.
I'm sorry?
That's my main instrument, guitar. But
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, the first time you pick it up and you strum it, it's like,
Yeah. And the first time it works, like one of my favorite things about being a music teacher is that moment when guitar, violin, whatever it might be, the first time the student tries to play a note and it comes out exactly like they wanted it to sound like.
yeah.
And you can just see them. They just light up.
Mm.
And the big gig last year was the first time that happened to me personally
Hmm.
since I was probably 12. I don't remember the last time, because I don't know, I've just been playing a lot of different instruments. So if I pick up a banjo and I play it, I won't know
Hmm.
how to sound like Roy Clark or, you know,
Steve Martin.
yeah, like whoever you want to pick as a great banjo
It's
player.
amazing that because I'm just looking around my room here at the gear, because I test out a lot of stuff, and then what I do is I get onto Reverb and sell it when I'm not going to use it to try and test something else.
Mm,
It also made me think of the environment you're in. If you're a school teacher or an admin or you homeschool or whatever the educational environment is, there's also the problems of space. There's also the problems of, as you said, budget. But it also means you don't need the one thing. Like I've got like a just this thing here with lovely colors.
yes.
It's not really an instrument.
Okay.
It's a thing that will control other instruments, right?
Okay.
Had a 30 of these for 30 kids. Would you use that the entire year?
I
Not
can't see
really.
myself using it. No. I mean, for the entire year, no.
No, and so the whole environment idea for me, starting with tech and the pathways and simplifying things for people, I suddenly realized, hang on, if I have a class of kids and they each choose a pathway, not only can I save my budget, but I can also tailor units or programs specifically, differentiate with technology as well,
Yeah.
which means I end up with these really nice environments where kids can move to what they want to explore as we do it. And like your kids were saying, oh, yeah, we're going to do jazz and we're going to research this and do this. We're finding that kids team up. And if one kid does sampling and another kid does, let's say, triggering or orchestration or something, what happens is when they hit a brick wall or they hit a problem,
Mhm.
they come and talk to each other and they say, you know what, I'm studying this over here and I can really help you with that. And the kid goes, oh, yeah, I can do that for you. So instead of it becoming like, okay, today, guys, we're going to do just this, then this, suddenly the whole room becomes experts.
Yes. In something.
That,
Right? Like they become experts in their part of it. It's like when I have the orchestra playing here or the strings
yeah,
ensemble, let's say, the viola plays their part and the violin plays their part. They're not expecting to play the same instrument or the same part.
correct.
They're
Yeah,
they're interested in complementing each other, right?
yes.
So yeah,
It's that's what I'm really excited about, and that's only just started to happen in the last year and a half, as things have been moving, and we've been talking about it, Chris and I. We're starting to get data. We're starting to get confirmation that this is actually working, and it's helping both teachers and students. That, for me, that's been quite exciting.
I think it's amazing. And then so we haven't mentioned specifically that you've just released the music pathways, music
Music
technology
technology
pathways is
pathways. Yep,
understanding music technology at all stages of learning.
correct.
Yeah.
So for people who, like when I started teaching at the age of 21, which seems like that's crazy to me now when I look back on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems crazy. All the way to, you said you've been in international schools for now 26 years.
Hmm.
That's amazing. So the idea is that no matter where you're learning, no matter how long you've been learning for, this will help you. And it's on Kindle. I'm still working a few things out with Kindle to make sure, everyone gets the best experience when they get the book. Um, and it's the price is not a thing. It's just going to stay that way as it is. But I'm going to keep adding chapters. So at the moment, after talking to yourself and other educators, I'm adding resources, budgeting plans, all sorts of how it works in the classroom examples, so that not only do you get the 10 pathways outlined and explained and given life, but I also have lots of funny stories from my classroom in there where many people will sympathize, where that one student that wants to do something and they come to you, and no matter what they do, they just can't get something working. So there's a whole thinking process in there, and I break down what that actually looks like in the classroom as well. Because again, as teachers, I believe we thrive on examples. And when we see those, we can apply them to our context.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking a couple things as you say that. First of all, I was chatting with my son over breakfast about this point, your book being on Kindle. I read, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I read that chapters will be updated
Hmm.
on the Kindle version. So I can buy the Kindle version of your book, then it'll be updated after the purchase. Is that
Hmm.
correct?
That's correct.
New chapters will be added or something? How does that
That is
work?
correct. So there's 6 chapters at the moment that goes through why this approach, so what we've been talking about today, then the journey I've taken, because, as we've been talking, the whole time from the beginning, I was interested in technology. And I remember GarageBand being released and John Mayer getting up there and demonstrating with Apple GarageBand, and that was like a mind
Yeah.
blown moment. Um, and it's been 20 something years of me asking this question: why is this tech thing so hard in education? Why do we have to keep going to conferences about tech? And no one actually teaches me how to use it. They just say, this is amazing, this is innovative, like
Mhm.
AI, for example. And yet, if you go on LinkedIn or Instagram, you will find accounts of people saying, do this.
Yeah.
So that was something I had in my head the whole time. So I thought, okay, the why. Why does this work? The journey, to see if people connect with my story of why this is important.
Mhm.
And then the pathways themselves. So there's 10, breaking them down. So we have things like looping, sampling, triggering, orchestration, because with technology, orchestration is like the Rimsky-Korsakov famous textbook. But when you add technology to it, it's a very different beast. You use the same principles, but there's so much more to learn. Scoring, mixing, and each of these could literally be a lifetime of investigation, and they lead to jobs in the real world. Like
Yeah.
you can become a mixing engineer. If we help our students by helping ourselves, then I keep adding chapters of this is what I do in my classroom to help students investigate this. So I've got this approach I call the ternary approach. So, like in musical form, ternary, ABA.
Okay.
The A is called timeline analysis. So instead of using notes, we get a piece of paper, you pick any style or genre of music you want, and I've got this system of it's a mixture of graphic scoring, musical musicianship theory, and a timeline with timestamps where you listen to the music, you put your thoughts down, but we start labeling what the tech elements are in the track. So it's like a hybrid of, let's say, the Western European notation tradition,
Hmm.
but also technology. And when we get this schematic, I call it,
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact article. There was an artist, is it Mike Hamad? He, I think it was in the New York Post or something. He would make these beautiful artwork schematics of concerts he would go to.
When you're listening to a great piece of music, what are you imagining? Mike Hammett draws while listening. As songs and live performances play, in this case it's one by the band Fish, he He sketches in one furious stream.
Won't you step into the freezer? Caesar with a tweezer.
Lines, circles, and arrows all turn into something like an impressionistic flowchart, or what he calls a schematic. This has been
Kind of got me thinking, hey, I love that idea. Could kids do that? I think that was back in the 2000s. And then the next step, the B. So you've done the ternary. The B is the performance mapping. You mentioned before orchestra. We know how orchestras sit. Jazz bands, we know how jazz bands sit. Concert band, choirs. But how do you set up for a live rock band? How do you add a synth or three or four? How do you add samplers and drum machines and perform like we see artists today performing? Because they have lights, they have installations, they have things where they move their hands and it does all sorts of effects. Like, so that's mapping that out from the basics of where does the power go, which cable is in, which cable is out. Do we have MIDI controlling the lights? Like it's endless. And then finally we get to the ternary, the A aspect, where we put those two maps together with the track we listen to, and we go, okay, what did we learn from this? What new vocabulary have we heard? Have we digested? Have we brought into ourselves? And then how can we do it?
Right.
And you only have to do that 2-3 times before all of a sudden the level of understanding in the room is at such a level that you've heard of Andrew Huang on YouTube. He's a musician, producer, gear tech explorer.
Okay.
And he's got this series called 4 Producers, 1 Sample, where he brings producers from all over the internet. They get one vocal sample or musical sample or whatever, and the challenge is produce a track. And it's amazing because you get everything from like this glitch hop to dubstep to ambient music. It's amazing. But what's really cool is before they play each other's track, they break it down. And my kids, for the first time, they're sitting there, and within 2 minutes, I have to stop and they go, "Sir, what the heck are they talking about?" They're like, I glitched this and the reverb, I made it really wet, and then I've got this analog filter and it's modulating to this and blah, blah. And I do that on purpose.
Yeah.
Because they go, "Sir, I have no idea. It sounds amazing. I want that. But what the heck?"
What is
By
that?
the end of this process, they're watching this going, "Oh yeah, I can do that."
Yeah.
And I have to remind them, you realize the first time we did this, you all freaked out collectively, and now you're just going, "Oh yeah, I can do that." So it's working. It's having this process. So I put that in the book with kids' examples, and my plan is hopefully that in the next let's say couple of months, we'll end up from 6 chapters to about 12 chapters with lesson plans and links and all sorts of stuff. So very long-winded example of sorry, what's in the book, but it is to help teachers and students. That's my goal.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's funny because you were talking about so many things there. I have like 5 different comments and questions. And, you asked the question, why is this tech thing so hard? And part of the reason, I think, is that still, until I had heard about the music pathways, the technology pathways, I was thinking of technology as one thing, so
Oh, I like.
it's kind of like trying to learn how to play the orchestra. You're not trying to learn how to play the violin. You're trying to play the orchestra. It's like,
Yep, and it's not possible.
no. So why was that so hard? Because I was trying to learn everything all at once, not realizing what I was doing to myself, and then as a byproduct of that to my students,
Mm.
like,
Yeah, no, I sympathize with that. That's something I've personally struggled with for years because you just think of a door, reason, logic, both actual things, even though reason and logic is quite funny. Ableton, Pro Tools. I think I've got licenses for all of them because at some point I would have to jump and then learn again. And I thought to myself, this shouldn't be this hard. Like, yeah, I'm trying to do everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole struggle, if no one actually helps you as well,
Hmm. Well,
that's not a good mind explosion.
that's part of what I liked about the big gig was the whole concept of that of musical futures, in fact, in
Hmm.
general, is approaching it. Why do bands get together, teenagers meet up
Hmm.
with their friends, pick an instrument, meet in a garage, and become literally a garage band, you know,
Hmm.
without there being a teacher there to guide them and without, standard
Yeah.
European style notation to assist them, and they still make great music. And you get your Nirvana and your, Alice in Chains. And I
Hmm.
don't know if any of those guys could read music or not, but I don't think that's how they wrote their biggest songs.
Yeah, I think there's a big shift coming. At least I know through the IB and through the schools that I connect with and what we teach, this idea of music. And you would go to a CD store. Remember those? We go to a CD store,
I do.
and there'd be a world music section, which is, this big, and then you
Mm.
get like the jazz section, and then the rock section and the metal section. This idea of teaching music that may not have sheet music,
Mm.
and how do we approach that, and why, not necessarily that it's better, but it's how our mind works and how that music is taught and then how that music is experienced and passed on is actually a system that we musicians actually innately do.
One of the things about all of this together, and I do agree with what you just said, is that there's a shift, a change is going to come because, um, uh, like one of the things that Chris was explaining to me when I was just learning about this idea was instead of looking at I'm going to learn this thing, I'm going to learn triggering or
Mhm.
sampling or whatever it is. I'm going to figure out what I'm trying to do. What is my goal? What is my purpose? So, just like we plan our classes, we start with the overall goal in mind and we do backward by design planning.
Mhm.
You start from what is our goal and then backward designing how do we get there, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, I thought that was a huge shift for me in the way that I looked at this technology rather than I want to add technology because it exists and I want kids to know how to use it. What are we going to do with it? So
Mhm.
if we're creating like did that assignment that I was explaining to you, my students, I had three kids in a group. One was playing violin, one was playing piano, and one was playing flute, and they were trying to do a jazz rendition of the melody, right? And they said, "But Mr. Van, we need drums." And I said, "Well, you've got a keyboard right in front of you. It's got drums built in. Like if you want to program drums, that's a whole other thing. But yes, you could play it. You could hit the preset record. Like you have options, right? Because you have
Mhm.
now an actual need. We never
Mhm.
talked about using a drum machine before because we didn't need one. Now we're
Yeah.
talking about it because we need it.
Yes, exactly.
Dr. Jennifer Walden was one of the other presenters at the big
Love those.
gig
Yeah.
in Kobe. And she talked about what you've mentioned in two different ways now. One was world music, which we were talking about. So what does that mean exactly? Because world music in a CD store, yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
in a CD store, that means music from places that we're not. That's what world music is. Whereas all music is world music, because if not, it's, I guess, from Mars or the moon. I don't know, but
Which would be cool. Which would
which
be
would be
cool. Yes,
awesome.
yes, I'm with you.
I'm not counting it out yet.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
So that was part of it, is like stop seeing world music as this other thing. It's that if you think of world music as all music has an equal place and different, for each person at different times serves different purposes like
Hmm.
that,
And different
rather than
systems as well.
exactly. That's the other part of it. The part B of that
Mm.
is I wouldn't notate. Okay, let's go back to your rock that you
Yeah, yeah.
mentioned, the other part of the store. Like Eddie Van Halen doing hammer-ons on the guitar,
Hmm.
Guitar Player magazine, and those guys had to figure out how do we even write that down? Because there's no
Mm,
tab
exactly.
for playing with both your hands on the fretboard.
Yeah.
So when my students were trying to explain to me how they had turned that melody into a classical piece of music or a rock piece, um, this one group in grade 9, they turned it into a surf rock
Oh,
piece.
I love that.
It was
Bring
so
on the
cool.
shadows. Bring on, yeah. Let's do it. Okay.
And the same melody played by a different group as classical on a cello, a flute, and the vibraphone.
Beautiful.
It
Nice.
was so cool. Like I could turn that into a much longer unit, I'm sure.
Well, not to jump in there, but the chapter "Do Images Have Sound" in my book, I think it's like
Mm,
chapter 6. That's exactly the whole point of that. So we explore the music of Pixar and composers like Michael Giacchino and James Newton Howard and for Finding Nemo and things like this. They do it so, I'm going to say perfectly. They do it in such a way that a very simple idea, like what you're saying, take this melody, make it jazz, make it classical, just a simple two chord seesaw pattern or a simple melody. What
hmm
is it?
Yeah.
Suddenly becomes the kids go, oh yeah, let's play that, let's do it. And we do what you said. We put into small groups and the kids have to create that arrangement. And that thing in itself, you repeat that multiple times. It's like the, what did you say before? The learning to play the orchestra.
hmm
The kids technically don't have an orchestra, they've got 4 or 5 kids in their group, but they learn what each instrument can and cannot do, and they
Yes.
help each other.
Yeah.
And it just, yeah, I love that approach. That sounds really magical what you're doing.
That thank you. And it felt that way when I saw it. It in my head it looked cool, and sometimes things that sound good in your head don't sound good when they come out, you know.
Yes,
But
yes.
this one, there was a moment I remember what you just said triggered a memory too, because I was thinking about there was this moment where my in one of the classes, a guitar player was over on the drums showing the
Hmm.
drummer how to play the beat, you know? And I
Yep.
was like, not only did that kid could that kid do that, which I thought was cool on its own. But
Yeah.
the fact that those kids, like that guitarist, understood exactly what the drummer was doing
Mm,
and how those pieces fit together, because I think one of the things about musicality and being a musician is I remember I was in a conducting course one time, and the conductor said you kind of have to be aware of what you're doing here, but you also have to be hearing it through your two ears, different things
mm,
kind of thing, you know. And when you're playing, it's kind of like that. I need to hear my guitar. What am I strumming? Am I hitting the chords right? But with my other ear, I need to hear, is it in time with
yes.
the fiddle player, you know? Um,
Yes.
so it just felt like I had no idea how, I'll use your word, magical that was going to be. I just thought it would be a cool thing to do. It met the needs of what we had planned previously. You know, we talked about that backward design.
Yeah.
So, you know, we had our inquiry questions and we had our all our stuff for MYP. And I thought,
In your lessons and like your questions you're going to ask and what do you think? But it led to something far better than what you had imagined.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's one of those bigger than the sums of its parts thing, you know?
I think for me, the technology and Dr. Walden, I haven't been able to attend the online conferences for global music yet, but I really want to do this because I do see we have a lot of two thoughts at once. I do see that cultures around the world have such a rich tradition in how they communicate and how they involve people in music making.
Yep.
And that involvement was what you did in the lesson. And there's that student agency and choice, but it's within certain parameters because we can't all be free jazz musicians. Like it has to sort of have a, what do you call it, trajectory and a
hmm
purpose.
hmm
But the examples that she brings in and the musicians that she brings in have such a deep understanding of how to get everyone involved in the process. And
Yeah.
there's, different rhythmic communication methods, different pitch communication methods, and it is magical. And it made me think, what would happen if we used technology with the exact same approach?
Yeah.
What would happen if we took Orff, Schulwerk, or Kodai, or how Cuban musicians perform in a band, or how South African musicians on their instruments create their ensemble and communicate the calls and the changes and polyrhythms? Like, what if it was all technology? What would change, or would it be the exact same approach?
I think I mean, integrate it. Like
Mm,
the first step for me would be to integrate them together. So you like those kids who suddenly needed a drummer but didn't have one, so they just used the preset recorded drum beat
the-
on the keyboard.
yeah.
Um, I don't think that unit would have gone as well as it did if not for the fact that I had attended Jennifer's session at the big
Oh,
gig,
wow.
because her talk about musical notation,
Mm,
like how do you write down these notes? So a student came to me and said, Mr. Van, you want us to tell you what rhythm we used for our arrangement of the piece, but I don't know how to write drum music. I said, well, there are a couple of solutions here. First, you can go and you can study how do I showed them the diagram where you show the 5 lines with the staff and you show the kick
mhm,
drum and the snare drum and the
mhm,
hi-hat, the crash.
mhm.
So I showed that diagram. I said, you can use this if that will help you get to express your idea, basically,
Yeah.
to translate it. Or create a system that explains to me what you did. Because one of the things that Jennifer was talking about was that there's not one way to write rhythms.
Mhm.
There are many different ways. And am I going to say that the way that I learned with the kick drum here and the snare drum here and the hi-hat here, that's the only way because that's the way I know?
Mhm.
It's kind of like the idea that as teachers, we're not there to tell them what to think. We're there to give them the tools to figure out what they think.
I like that.
You
Yes.
know?
Hmm.
And it was kind of like that. So my students in different groups wrote down their rhythmic patterns
Hmm.
differently.
But it still communicated what they did and how they planned it and what the intent was. And yeah, that's
Correct.
cool.
And so they started to see that concept of, we're trying to translate language. So how do you do that? People do it differently, like,
Mm.
is it better to use letters or characters like we do in Chinese?
Hmm.
It's not better or worse. It's just different ways of doing it. And,
Hmm.
you know, I think,
Different purposes may have different needs.
exactly. So all of this for me ties together. What Chris was teaching us in that big gig about your music technology pathways and that whole
Hmm.
concept. What Jennifer was telling us about considering notation for its fit to purpose
Mm. Okay.
and
I like that.
easily going back and forth between those
Hmm.
ideas, because now I don't have to say, okay, we're making a rock song, so we can't use a drum machine because rock music doesn't use a drum machine. What about Linkin Park? I mean,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
most productions, when the album comes out, the drum line is doubled or tripled or with all sorts of programming.
sure. I think just that idea, and I tell my students all the time, I used genre because it fit our purpose. I wanted them to think about your question about what elements make a genre kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but personally, I don't see very often I don't see the value of genre at all, because it's more
Mm.
limiting rather than liberating. If I want to do a rock song, okay, as long as I accept that I can break every single rule of what makes a rock song, you
And
know.
to be fair, rock music, when it started,
Mhm.
that was one of the things they did. They broke the rules.
Yeah.
challenge the rules. That's something that made rock what it is or what it was.
Yeah.
Like it's this idea of we're talking lots of things like music education, how it's approached, and what the kids need. But the pathways initially were um, curated from multiple words with this idea of I used to teach famous pieces of music. That used to be the topic. And
Mm.
you can have a guess what those famous pieces were. Like you've got Mussorgsky, you've got Beethoven, you've got Bach. Okay.
Yeah.
They were the famous pieces, and we had to teach these to the kids. That's what's called a topic. It'd be like saying Baroque music. That's
Yeah.
another topic.
Mm.
Strings music is also a topic because it's limiting or it's constraining the repertoire or the ideas to a time and place.
Mhm.
That's basically what it is. What the chapter in my book was, is rock plagiarized? Suddenly, yeah, we're talking about rock, but what happened is we can talk about music on a timeline from 1510, which we do,
Mhm.
because if everyone's heard Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven, there's a piece of music, I think if I get his name right, by Giovanni Battiste. I'm trying to think, it's like 1510. You listen to it, it's Stairway to Heaven, it's the opening riff.
Song from like the early 70s. They argue that they wrote Stairway to Heaven.
Taurus, they were after the same thing.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes.
Through this idea, and this is what we call it's the conceptual understanding of music. It's not looking at music from within a box or from within a time period or from within a topic. It's being able to connect music on this timeline of it's all good music. It's all an expression.
Mm.
And if we can, what your kids did, pick out the pieces that define it, we can then use that. That's kind of where the idea started growing. And then I thought, okay, cool. I like that idea. That works. I can teach that. That's why the music by concept book, that's what that was. But then tech, how does that apply? It's not stopping, it's still changing, it's still developing. And
Mhm.
I thought, what if I took the same conceptual approach, but this time we have 10 really big overarching ideas that we can dive into one at a time. And that's where something sort of went ding, something turned on. And if I wanted to investigate looping, for example,
Mhm.
Ed Sheeran, Ariana Grande, there's some contemporaries. I could go back to using my Boss, what is it, a RC something loop pedal, like you used to in the garage when you're playing guitar.
Oh yeah.
Um, Bootsy Collins playing in the, is it 60s, 70s with these amazing bass riffs.
Mhm.
Um, Even
Jaco
Bruno Mars,
Pastorius
Sonic. Yeah, exactly.
when he did Third Stone from the Sun, but he did it on the bass and he did it with ping ponging.
That idea goes back to the Ciccone, the bass line, boom, 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 and they just loop it in that Renaissance Baroque type idea and improvise on top.
Mhm.
It's not new.
Yeah.
It's just let's put a conceptual label to it, and it opens up so many avenues for us to explore. And yeah,
How did you come up with the 10? Like I imagine, and you said this was, years and years of,
that's a
but how
good
did it end up
question.
being 10?
Like I've got one notebook here that kind of, that's like the end process, and the others are behind me. Um, I love to collect gear and pedals and put things together and create music. So I will have my old Boss reverb pedal. which I think I've now replaced with the lovely UAD ones because you can plug them in and control them from your iPad or whatever.
Hmm.
And then you start doing that with more things. Then you start buying stuff, and before you know it, the idea of tech is lost because you're just lost in the gear.
Yeah.
Or if you're at school and the school says, we want to build a studio, lovely. You build it. I'm not saying this is your scenario, but you build it, and then all of a sudden it hits you at one moment. You go, oh, but I've got a class of 20 kids. We can't all fit in there. What are we going to do with it?
Yeah.
And then what tends to happen with technology is we get lost in the tech. And when I started making a list of words, some of those words I had real trouble because they were almost the same thing or they were connected to each other.
Hmm.
So if I did drum programming, like a drum machine, for example, I've got one
Hmm.
behind me. How is that different to picking up something and pressing the buttons?
Right.
You could play the same thing, but how is that different? What differentiates one from the other?
Hmm.
Or one question I actually had at a workshop was a teacher said, okay, if I'm writing music with notes in
Hmm.
technology, isn't that using technology? And I had to sit back for a moment and go, you're using the technology, let's say MuseScore, Sibelius, Dorico.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are using technology to input the notes, but is that actually engaging and utilizing technology? Like, I understand you're literally clicking and physically doing it, but is that really any different to pencil and paper? And like, what's the thinking process behind here? Really, it's not. It's like having a whiteboard versus a electronic whiteboard.
The one thing that I would say about that, because I use MuseScore a lot for arranging, and maybe it's too fine a point, but there are a lot of decisions that I make on MuseScore
Mm-hmm.
because I plunk a note there in the wrong line by mistake, and I go, actually, that sounds better as a D than an F sharp. You know, so maybe it's just a little bit quicker process because of how I'm doing it, but I don't know.
But you see
Arranging,
how all of those things suddenly, if we had a room of music teachers, and all of a sudden that maybe it would be an argument, starts up. Um, what happens is the words that would get thrown out are technology related, but the rate at which technology is developing, so for example, Dorico, which is made by Steinberg, you can input notes, but it's a hybrid now of, let's say, Cubase and GarageBand and Sibelius,
Mhm.
which means you can do piano roll editor and it outputs the notes for you.
Right.
You can also add plugins, so virtual instruments and plugins to notes. So instead of it playing like a piano, it plays like a granular, dirty sort of synthesizer sound with ping pong delay, but with notes.
Right.
So I started getting really confused and I didn't know what words to pick. So what I did is like what you said before, backwards design.
Yeah.
I took some steps back and I said, okay, if I could simplify this process with conceptual ideas, umbrella terms, so really big words that if I went down further, further, smaller, 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 I would get to these ideas that teachers were talking about. So I made one of them scoring,
Hmm.
which means if you're using MuseScore, or if you're using Dorico, or if you're using, I don't know, Pro Tools or Logic with the notes, you're scoring.
Right.
And the decisions you make in that process all fit underneath that umbrella term of scoring. But there's even cooler things that have happened lately. So I'll just see if I can put this here in front of you. It's a
Okay.
little weird to put it on, so I'll just put it on. Ah. So I have this.
Hmm.
Okay. This is a USB breath controller.
Okay.
As I'm scoring the notes for, let's say, a clarinet, I breathe into this through its USB and it will attach the breath to the note. So as the note is played, I will get a simulation of the clarinet note attack coming in, the vibrato, and then dying out again. So as I'm literally playing the notes, I am playing
Yeah.
the parts in. And I've recorded songs for school plays with this, and I get comments like, "Who did you get playing the French horn?" Or "Who did you get playing the clarinet?" And I go,
Yeah.
"That was me."
Wow, you're
It's so this is what made me think, okay, I had about 30 to begin with, and then I pared them all back. Mixing is a huge one
yeah.
because mixing involves effects, EQ, compression. Um, they are complicated.
Mhm.
It could be as simple as adjusting volumes.
Yeah.
It could be as simple as panning left to right, like a Pink Floyd album, with all the
Mhm.
guitars on one side and the the bass on another. Um, that's what led me to these 10 words. So I chose them as umbrella, sort of overarching macro concepts, macro ideas,
Mhm.
that then could actually have smaller ideas underneath them. And part of the book, what I'm going to try and do at the final chapter, is create what's called a word bank. So if I said mixing, if someone said to me, okay, what would be included? What would be some key words in this pathway of mixing?
Mhm.
I will have a word bank that will have EQ, reverb, delay, that type of thing. So that will help people help organize their thoughts underneath each of these umbrellas. Does that kind
That
of make sense?
it does. And the fact that you started off saying, or you just say you started off having about 30 words, you said an umbrella, I think of it in terms of like there's a point and then there are bullet points, sub points beside it,
Mhm.
so mixing means all of your all of your mixing, which is the EQing, the compression, the all the things that we have to do. And
I
I
have printouts that I'm going to be publishing just free for everyone to my website. So what I do with my students, one of the very first lessons I do is I print off all of these, put them on a table,
Mhm.
and I give them a bunch of post-it notes or pens or whatever, and I say, okay, tell me what you think these mean.
That's
And
awesome.
there's like a scramble. I think this, I think this. And then we all go back to our chairs and I pick some up and I go, we have to do this again. So I bring them back up again. And then I see kids pick up another kid's answer
Mhm.
and they put it on a different pathway. And the kid goes, no, 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 no. And I say, okay, explain to me why. And so we start to get this dialogue. And by the end of the lesson, we have a very refined, detailed definition. And those kids helped me with the publishing of this book. I've actually got permission, and there's certain parts in the book. There's a YouTube link to like a private YouTube, and you can watch that lesson in progress. So I've actually got videoed lessons of me in the classroom with the kids that you can click on and watch.
Right.
And the questions they have are exactly the questions I hear from adults and other kids in schools. What you just said, what is this? What does this mean? Because of that very point. So what I end up finding is with the students, they love that dive in exploration and they start playing with that. And then I would give them, let's say, just a 25 key keyboard and we plug it in. And all of a sudden, one kid goes, "Oh, I love this bass line." So they put the octaves all the way down so they get like a trap bass line with the.
Yeah.
And another kid puts it up 4 octaves so they can do like a lead.
Mhm.
And then another student has it locked to the progressions that are already in the box. So it's really funny. They're actually just sitting there with like a 25 key Arturia keyboard with one finger playing the chord progression, but with one finger.
Yeah.
And I instantly have like this group of, let's say, middle school musicians playing in like a what do we got, like a Kygo Flume sort of dance track. One sounded like Kylie Minogue the other day. Track, and they're just doing this journey. I've started to, and this was an original intent, which I'm happy worked. They start to connect the pathways,
That's
and that's cool. So if there's 10 pathways and you've only picked one, but through your journey you suddenly have another need. You go, oh, I need a bass player, like you would in a band.
yeah.
Or this drum player, we need to get like someone who plays in time. And we need to layer and produce, and we need more hi-hats or like a, I don't know, Marvin Gaye type of a drum machine sound with the 808.
Yeah.
Then they start to connect the pathways, and the music they create is richer or it has more purpose. It doesn't always have to work. That's one thing I tell the kids. If it fails, because they use that language, they say, "Oh, we failed, sir," or "It sucked." And I
Mm.
say, "Well, you know what? Most bands don't start out being perfect either. They
Yeah.
have to actually work at their craft and they have to practice it. So, what worked, what didn't work, and what can we do better?" Now, with the senior kids, they're at a level where they're able to make connections. They know which pathways they like and which they want to investigate. So they're happy, I'll say happy, happy to present their work to the class.
Hmm.
And something I've learned from the IB. So I'm now a diploma workshop leader. I can run workshops for the IB for diploma music, the last two levels of
Hmm.
music. And one thing the workshop leader had us do to each other, he called it glow and grow. So when you hear the music, you got to tell them what did they glow with? What was the thing that just rocked? Like what was it?
Yeah.
And the next thing is the grow. What could they add? What could they fix? But it has to be in that same language. So at the beginning of the process, it becomes, okay, that's all right. You think it sucked, but you know what? What do we learn?
Right.
Then it progresses to glow and grow. And eventually, I stand back and I'm at the moment now where I go, okay, what do you need help with? And they go, no, don't worry, sir.
Yeah.
You stay over there. I've got this. It's no longer a limiting focus. It is now an all-encompassing, all-inclusive focus,
Yeah.
which is actually more enriching.
Totally.
Yeah.
I absolutely, I started many, many years ago. I mean, in the 90s, I started looking at music. I think it was a first grade student who came to me and said, "Mr. Van, I really love this song." Like, who knows what it was? It could have been from the Barney the dinosaur thing. I don't know, but
Remember
she loved
Barney?
the
Yeah.
song and and she wanted to know if we could sing that song in class. And I thought, why didn't I think of that before? Like, these kids, if I let them play or sing the song that they chose, the engagement is automatic. And then
Yeah.
when you get that difficult moment where they can't get that chord to sound right, or they can't play that little trill that happens, that everybody
Hmm.
loves,
Hmm.
they're going to work through it because they desperately want to do that, you know? They want
Yes.
that song to sound like, they want to be able to
Meeting
play it.
meeting the kids where they're at,
Yeah, yeah.
finding the music they love.
I think the idea you said about can't remember the terminology, but it's like voice and choice. You give kids agency, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then my role is like when I'm conducting, my role isn't to be the metronome. I'm not going tack, tack, tack on my stand. My
Mm,
role is just to help them, to remind them of what they want to say or how they want to say it,
yeah.
you know?
No, I'm with you. Yeah. That's the teaching I love. And that's kind of how the classroom has evolved for me. And I've got a wonderful colleague. She does exactly the same. And it's like um, I get to see the kids progress. They get to come up and they have that thinking. That's where the tech idea came in to say, hang on, could technology not be so foreign? Could it actually potentially do the exact same thing and
Yeah.
enrich the lesson even further? And yeah, I think that's where the magic, for me at least, happens. And I'm hoping that with the book coming out and people sort of adopting or reading about this, I start to hear about your stories. There's a music teacher, his name is Pavel, in Cambodia, and him and I connected through this. And he's been giving me his story, and I also want to put that into the book. I've got a colleague, Lauren, in China. I'm going to get her story. She's doing that timeline analysis with her students
Hmm.
and explaining how it's just exploding their creativity, their listening has improved, and they're really getting something out of it. I'm
Hmm.
going to put her story in. So the whole purpose is to have that method available, but also to tell the stories about the teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That I love that. I mean, because you've said a couple times, we've seen that kids do this. We've seen that kids pair up, or we've seen that kids do this. And the
Hmm.
thing about it is, they're kids, yes, but they're also musicians, which is what we are. And we do the same thing. Like when I was when I was going through that with the big gig with Chris, and he was teaching about the music technology pathways, as adults, as musicians, as teachers of music, we did
Mhm.
exactly the same thing that you're talking about. So it's not a it doesn't it never feels like an us and them when I do something like this. We're all
Mm.
in it together. I know more than them about certain parts of it, but especially like when they were writing and arranging the song, they knew what they wanted to do. So I
Mhm.
could only inform that. So they were the experts at that
Yeah.
moment, and I was part of the support mechanism.
I don't know if this is a like a really good tie-up for all of that, but one thing I did say from the beginning when I started teaching, and it'd be amazing if we could get this like into all schools ever, like all subjects, not just music. Teacher does the project first.
Mm, okay.
Imagine how different teaching would be with that collaborative student agency, but teacher agency. Like imagine all coming together. We do it first,
Hmm.
then we share it, and the kids obviously will improve on it, clearly. And then that process, that it's like a real-time collaboration, but it's ongoing.
I I love it. And I mean, I sit in with the kids when they're playing um whatever they're playing, when they get to the point like where I think they can just kind of run on automatic. I'll jump on the piano or I'll jump on the guitar. I'll
Mm.
go, okay, guys,
Hmm.
just do that middle eight again. I'm going to solo over top, you know?
And
And
you're in the group, you're in the band.
yeah, exactly. And so for them, they're jamming and it sounds good. And that's what you want. Like we don't use that term very often when we're talking about classical music, but um
Hmm.
they do Pachelbel's canon. And once I've taught them, what they need to know to be able to improvise over top of that, okay.
Of
eh, What if now we added a jazz beat to it? Hmm. Like now we can just play with it as much as we play it,
Yeah, exactly.
you know?
I love that.
Yeah.
I
I have a
really
lot of
hope
fun.
that that becomes something useful for teachers. Something of it. I think the mind shift. We do that. We love that moment where we get to play music with the students we all love. And
Mhm.
I'm hoping that mind approach, that mind shift when it comes to technology, gets the exact same response.
I think what you have set up for us to use as that tool, those pathways, the fact of people like Musical Futures setting up this thing where we don't have to know everything. It's okay for me to sit down with a sampler and not know what to do with it because I'm not expected to know everything. I
Hmm.
have my seat at the round table.
Yes.
So I think all these things are tying together. You said at one point, there's a big shift, and a big shift doesn't happen from typically it doesn't happen from one big thing. It's not always the big bang. It's very often a lot of small things that happen to shift a larger
Hmm.
picture. You know what I mean?
It's here, it's there, and the beauty about this is it's global because I feel that we have teachers around the world, whether it be LinkedIn, Instagram, or with Chris through Music Teachers International, or even through the big gigs.
Hmm.
I feel like we have teachers now who are adopting technology with that instrument band jamming mindset,
Hmm.
and they're exploring pathways which will only ever improve the work of our students, the engagement of our students. I really feel that that is something that is shifting, can shift, and the idea of being a musician, whether you're a DJ, a classical pianist, a guitarist who likes looping, or whatever it is, you are a musician, and we can all sort of be a part of whether it be creating music on a stage or in a studio. It's
Hmm.
still that part of we're creating.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think what you set out to do, what I see is that it's working. You said that you thought that you could put it all into a book and help people.
Yeah.
It's helped me, and I'm sure it's helped
Oh,
other people as well. I do feel like if you and I were sitting in the same room sipping coffee or tea, we could be going for another hour easily, which I love. I feel like this has been a really rich conversation. I really appreciate the time that you've given
Oh,
me.
I appreciate. Yeah, this was really nice for me. Thank you, man. I appreciate this.
All right. Thanks very much. Take care.
Bye.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Good night.